Good morning, Chuck. Welcome to today's short podcast. Chuck Story is the director of Raymond's CIS practice. Uh, Chuck, welcome.
Well, good morning, Chip. It's good to be here as always.
Going to talk just a little bit about the practice this morning. Going to really try to focus on what separates what we can provide versus some of the other providers in the marketplace, and really highlight what I call the three legs of the CIS stool. I'm sure you'll correct my perceptions of them just a little bit as we go along, and then wrap up with chatting about how they interrelate to each other to provide some pretty interesting and pretty differentiating results. So that's where we're going to head. As we get started, for those of us who are fairly familiar with you, we think about your FBI career. We've all seen The Accountant and The Accountant 2. We imagine that, you're heading into these big businesses, finding the fraud, with your RV full of supplies and tools and all of those sorts of things. And I even remember back in the day when we were talking before you joined the firm that you apologized for not taking one of my calls because you were executing a search warrant. So thinking about that, maybe just give us a second about how your day actually compares to the accountant.
Well, unfortunately, not quite as exciting as the accountant character, but certainly provides a lot of interesting aspects dealing with a real variety of problem sets our clients bring us and our prospects approach us with. So that as close as I can get to the excitement of the accountant, in that really it's unique problem sets that we get to come up with creative solutions in conjunction with the prospect or client.
Yeah, not quite as Hollywood, but very similar in that, in the movie, the accountant was brought in when there was something that went wrong, right? There was in fact a problem. And just like we don't always know what the problem is. Sometimes it's a financial problem where things just seem off. Sometimes there's allegations and you're sort of a safety blanket. But talk about some of the reasons that you might get called by an attorney or by one of the courts that is familiar with you, or just by a general business owner to come and help.
For sure. I've explained this often to entities and individuals. We're often and more often brought in because, frankly, expectations or standards were not met in the sense of something's askew, numbers don't look right, operations don't seem to be operating as they should, but something's amiss. And it all boils back down to some sort of SOP or standard or expectation, whether it be financial or operational performance, that tends to plant the seed, if you will, in an entity's leadership or a partner in a partnership or whatever the case may be.
So let's chat about sort of the three legs of the stool. Maybe we'll start off with the background practice. I in my mind's eye think about the background team as, in the Library of Congress looking at microfiche, delving into the past with someone trying to find known associates and connections and all of those sorts of things. It's probably a little more modern than that now.
It is. There are a tremendous amount of databases to which we have access and various sources of information, principally open source information. But really, it's a function of knowing where to look, why to look certain places. And that is more often than not driven simply from experience doing background work, and then as well as my experience as a FBI agent. I say this often, habits are hard to break. And so that often leads us to how someone may have lived historically, and they may have purported, or the allegations that have been brought to us is they've changed their life and they are on the run, or they are somehow they've altered their normal pattern of life. But despite what movies reflect and despite what some people think, habits are hard to break. So more often than not, individuals still shop in similar stores, utilize similar services, Netflix, um, Instacart, um, gaming platforms, and those all require payments. And so I'm planting the seed. You can kind of see there's typically a breadcrumb trail that still exists, even though they may have changed some aspects of their life.
So the background work has this deep dive, and even our background practice is a little different than some of the run-of-the-mill things, right? I mean, there's services out there for 25.95 or whatever you can get background work, but what you're talking about is significantly more than that. You're talking about the combination of traditional background services combined with your law enforcement background and experience to really put together a good profile, which may go back a long ways. Even social media is hard to think about now because none of us want to admit our age. But you think about how long Facebook's been around and MySpace has been around, and the ability to go back and see these connections with people and places for a long time.
For sure. And we absolutely provide a service that is vastly different than the online checks individuals or entities often, unfortunately, I will say, rely on. Even in the reports from these online background checks, there's a litany of disclaimers with respect to the accuracy, or more importantly, the inaccuracies that may be included in these reports. So, one distinct difference is we actually pull from multiple sources to compare, and then we dig down and confirm with jurisdictions or agencies to confirm the validity and accuracy of the reported information we're obtaining.
That leads us probably to, what I might call the second leg of the stool. As the background folks are setting up profiles and digging into information that's out there, there's an investigative side too that's more the question and answer. I always think about the stereotypical dark room somewhere in the basement with a bright light shining at someone and a bunch of thumbtacks and all the different interrogation tools. And I know it's not quite like that, but the interviewing skill set that you bring is another way that I think we really differentiate ourselves. Talk about, the ability to sit and talk either with the actual targets or with folks who might have good information for you.
Oh, for sure. And that really um, is rooted in my more than 2 decades with the FBI. And I say that because I didn't have to go talk to people. Well, I did have to talk to people, but the goal was to get them to talk to me. And a big part of that is building rapport with individuals who typically did not want to talk to me. So, and that also entails a variety of individuals across society, from possibly, and not in a derogatory way, a homeless individual or a down and out individual, to an individual who could be a president of a company, a CEO, or anyone in between. But we very much had to be a chameleon as an agent with respect to adapting to who we were speaking to and what the goals of that particular interview were. And that still plays into my current role, whether I'm dealing with or I'm speaking to a C-suite, a business owner, or someone working a forklift. Um, you've got to be able to establish a rapport and all the while understand the goal of the interview.
So that I think is a great second leg to the stool, where you've got the background folks who have done a great job getting background information. You're able to get people talking to you, filling in lots of gaps, and many times some pretty unexpected gaps. How often in those conversations do you hear about things that were not at all what you thought you were going to hear about?
far more often than anyone would probably expect. And that is heavily dependent if I've done my job in building rapport and establishing some level of trust with who I'm interviewing. But once that has been established, um, it's shocking what people will reveal. And particularly if you present the situation that, hey, we are here to gain information, facts, and it's almost like a no judgment zone. You know, they've got to be comfortable to open their heart, if you will, and their experience and share with you key details. Ultimately, our clients are truly wanting to know.
So that maybe takes us to the part of the practice, which is, I think, what folks think about when they think about your practice, and that is the actual forensic accounting piece, the piece. And again, I think about the number crunchers in the back room who are poring over financial statements and bank statements and tracing out wealth, figuring out where the diamonds were bought and sold, and all those sorts of things. Chat just a little bit about that sort of the practice and the actual forensic accounting piece.
For sure. So the financial forensics, as I call it, they're all conducted by CPAs and CFEs, which I'm both of those, as well as my staff. And so there's the soft side, if you will, the soft skills of the interview, but then the numbers are what they are. They tell a story. And so the hope and really the goal is understanding the story that's been presented and then seeing what story is reflected in the factual numbers. And, oftentimes the numbers we're provided don't match the story that we've been provided. So then it's a question of, okay, are the numbers we're provided accurate? Are there other numbers that exist elsewhere? And so there's a tremendous amount of collaboration that happens between myself or the CIS practice and our clients to work through those questions as we work through an engagement.
So when you think about the number side of things, talk about some of these things besides financial statements that you might look at. Credit cards, bank statements, what else is out there?
Oh, for sure. It's really just the flow of money, not only flow of actual cash with respect to statements or how are they made, those activities may be documented within a general ledger, but it's also lifestyle, um, understanding the business, understanding the industry, understanding what we think should be reflected in the numbers versus what may have been reflected in the numbers. Um, Transfers in, transfers out, um, you know, obscure descriptions as to, that which could be an attempt to sort of skew how a transaction is reflected and basically deter questions about transactions. That makes sense.
So just putting on our accounting hat for the moment, when you think about small frauds, where do you typically see the small frauds hidden in financial statements?
The small frauds are typically the least complex, if you will. So it's going to be truly cash disappearing. It could be principally it's going to be the result of lack of segregation of duties and the lack of appropriate controls where cash received by the company doesn't actually make it to the bank. Could be that um, the company's records reflect a cash deposit, but the actual bank state or the bank records do not reflect that cash deposit. That's going to be the simplest form of such, or even just simply hard assets that go missing and inventory is adjusted on the books, yet inventory doesn't match what's actually on hand.
Now, when you think about the big dollars, that's a different type of thing, right? It's harder to have the big dollars stolen through, pocketing cash receipts that should go in or things like that, right? Where do you see the big dollar fraud type things, the seven-figure type activities?
I would even say the seven-figure activities still are impacted by the lack of segregation of duties. However, it tends to be a little bit more complex where journal entries or adjusting journal entries that really don't belong exist to help cover a trail, whether it be to transfers to accounts that cash should not have been transferred to, fictitious vendors, could be conspiracy or collaboration with other nefarious parties outside of an entity to extract cash out of an entity, again, through manipulation of supporting documentation. So we, a supposed purchase of inventory, and then there's a conspiracy between individuals, quote, receiving who are supposed to be receiving the inventory. And maybe that inventory actually never arrives at a location and is sold off site. And then the co-conspirators all share in that profit. So it gets a bit more complex with respect to supporting documentation and then covering those tracks or attempts to cover the tracks with accounting postings.
Yeah, going back to my audit days, I always think about looking at the financials and saying, if we're talking about a seven-figure fraud, there's usually only a handful of accounts where that can really be buried in, right? And cost of goods sold always comes to mind.
For
Um,
sure.
when miscellaneous is $1 million, that usually stands out, right? So it's just a finite number of places that you typically look. All right, so we've chatted about the three things, and again, I think when folks imagine this practice, they typically focus on the forensic accounting piece, right? That's a piece that a lot of folks have. But very few people have the investigative skills and the forensic accounting skills. And it's a pretty unique service offering to have both of those with the background piece. So I want to talk just a little bit about a recent project, I say recent, in the last 2 years, where we had a referral come to us. It had been floating around for a while. Another forensic firm had been engaged to try to figure out where the money went and really to locate the principal who had absconded with the money. And they had been unsuccessful, and it had, let's say, some duration had passed, and we had the lead, a little bit out of desperation, right? The attorneys were sort of on their last leg, and just fruitless efforts trying to figure out what had happened. They know a lot of money had been lent and disappeared, but didn't know where it had gone. And that practice that preceded us was a forensic accounting practice. My recollection is you got involved, and it seemed like it was 2 seconds, and it was longer. That was a couple of weeks. But the combination of the forensic accounting practice, your interview practice, and the background practice all combined to actually locate the subject in fairly short order. So I think that's a great story to tell to wrap up uh, the uh, the differentiator that our practice has with that combination of the three-legged stool versus a lot of practices who have just one leg of the stool. So maybe flesh out some of those details for us, Chuck.
Yeah, for sure. The client came to us with a very nice report that had a tremendous amount of work embedded in the report with respect to the financial side. They had articulated the prior firm had articulated quite nicely what money had been absconded with and used for personal reasons by this individual. But that next step is really where we came in and added value. And so basically asking some pretty simple questions as to lifestyle questions, who could potentially have information about this individual who had stolen the money. And then we just started kind of beating the phones, if you will, to get in touch with them. And more often than not, you know, there's individuals that have been wronged that are more than willing to share as much detail as they can obtain. And actually, they will go out and obtain more information to help you because they've been wronged by this individual as well. And so that's fundamentally one aspect of what we did. And then, as I mentioned earlier in this discussion, we took a look at where money had been spent on this individual in this individual's personal life, and much of that was not going to change. There were kids involved, and I'm pretty confident the kids were not going to be happy campers if they could no longer play via PlayStation with their friends through their account. That had to be paid somehow. Netflix had to be paid somehow. This individual really liked to use Instacart and grocery deliveries. I don't think my assumption was not much of that's going to change. Location's going to change. Um, Maybe the manner in which they receive those groceries are going to change, but they still have to be paid somehow. And so those were the 10,000 foot views that I started with. And within pretty quick, it was within a couple weeks through interviews, principally through interviews, we were able to actually identify the friend this individual was staying with about 6 states away. And then also from reviewing the breadcrumbs that were left within the financials we were provided, we were able to work with counsel and identify about 26 subpoenas to track down, if you will, additional breadcrumbs with respect to new cards that may be paying for these services or new sources of funds.
So let's just chat a second, going back to the interview. The people you interviewed, did you discover them or were they known already? And your technique of getting them to talk um, turned up information that hadn't been turned up before.
They were actually known, which was shocking to me, frankly, that the information I was able to elicit had not already been gained. But they were known individuals, and I just simply made sure counsel and everyone was okay with me contacting them, at least right off the bat. There were some subsequent individuals we interviewed who were not known initially, but on the front end, the known individuals had a wealth of information that had not been reported, which was key in finding this individual.
So the interview piece combined with some of the background work, figuring out the lifestyle, empowered you to chat with counsel and issue subpoenas and bring in information, which at that point gets subjected to the forensic work, right? You take a look, you look at the Amex bills, you look at the different things, and the first two legs helping you identify what you need the attorneys to get for you, then takes you to that third leg, which really is what sort of led you where you needed to go.
For sure. I mean, all those, and I keep using the term breadcrumbs, but there's always intel buried in information. At least that's my view. Okay, always may be a little strong, but more often than not. And so, taking the breadcrumbs from each of these sources and beginning to assimilate a story is more often than not applicable across any engagement we work, particularly this one.
Excellent. So pretty successful um, endeavor. How likely do you think the success would have been if we just had had the forensic accounting piece? I know we kind of talked about that because that's what the other group had, right? So, without trying
Yeah,
to do
how successful? Well, they were successful in detailing where the money had gone and how the money had been spent. But the goal of council was to attempt to recover some of the monies that had been spent. And so, thus, you have to find the individual and you have to find how the individual is basically still funding their life, and then identify the source of those funds and then proceed with legal process to hopefully secure some of those source funds.
It's a
So
great,
the take home there is really a lot of collaboration with counsel in support of their legal strategy.
it's a great story, Chuck. I mean, I think it's, both successful, but also very powerful for illustrating, where you're able to take advantage of the full service offering CIS brings and get some different results. Hopefully folks who listen to this don't wait until the last leg, or they're running out of time and they're desperate. Um, but if you think about who the folks that are sort of the right target for you to help out, what's your ideal folks? Who are the people who are having problems that are having these expectations that aren't met? Maybe they know they've got a problem, like that's this case, right? They know someone took money, or they think someone took money. Who are the folks that you'd love to have these conversations with?
Well, particularly counsels, because more often than not, a C-suite individual or a business owner or a partner, they're going to be confiding in their general counsel or outside counsel that, hey, I have a problem here and I don't know how to address it or vet out the details. And so, a real answer is they typically don't immediately go to search for a forensic accountant or an investigator, but making sure we have solid, trusted relationships with uh, corporate litigators, family law counsels, with respect to trusts or any sort of family matter, is really important for CIS. And because ultimately counsel's trusted by their clients, and we've got to have that same level of trust with the various counsels we interact with.
So we talked a lot about, examples where we know there was a problem, right? There was millions and millions of dollars missing. Do you ever get brought in where someone's concerned about something and you actually give them comfort to say, hey, nothing's amiss?
Absolutely. I say on the front end, sometimes my answers to you will not be the answers you want or assumed you'll get, but I'm going to give you what is observed and the facts, the answers that come from the facts that are presented. So sometimes it's not as expected. Sometimes it is. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Chuck, it's been a great conversation. I think you've done a really good job of helping correct my Hollywood fantastical ideals about what you do and what the practice does to a little more reality and a great example of how the three legs of the stool work together. So really appreciate your time this morning. Where can people find you if they're looking for you?
Yeah, so obviously Raymond.com under the consulting page and then the corporate investigative services tab as well, or chuck.story at Raymond.com.
Home phone number, 24/7 access, or better use the website?
I may just share yours.
Fair enough. All right, Chuck, thank you. I really appreciate your time today. Have a great one.
Thank you.